Okay, so thanks for coming on the show, Ethan. What champagne do we have today? What do you got next to you?
Today we have a nice bottle of Roeder Estate Brut from the Anderson Valley.
Oh, very nice.
I've kept it on ice, so it's nice and cold.
Okay, well, let's open that one up.
Yeah, it
And
should be lovely.
while you do that, I can talk a bit about this. But this actually started by the actual Roederer family in Champagne. So there's a connection with the French house there.
Oh,
Yeah, so back in 1982, Jean-Claude Rizard, who was the
mhm.
president of Champagne Louis Roederer at the time, selected this, and this is sort of like a half French, half Californian kind of operation. But yeah, quite nice.
Very nice. I'm more familiar with the half French, half New Mexican operation of Gruet.
Oh,
I
yes, yes.
I did graduate school. I studied ecology. I did my PhD in New Mexico and got to know Laurent Gruet, who brought House of Gruet over to America and he felt like the best comparison of Champagne terroir was northern New Mexico.
Wow.
So he planted grapes there and created a bunch of vineyards, and but they outgrew that because New Mexico is such a small
Mm,
growing area. So
yeah,
now Gruet is predominantly elsewhere, but I still love the New Mexican grapes. I have a
yeah,
fondness for them, of course.
great. Hey, well, show us what you got
Yes.
there and pop it open. Let's see how it goes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Here we go. Like a nun's fart. Is that how it's
That
supposed to
is
sound when it
that's
comes out?
perfectly how you're supposed to do it. How do you know about that?
Oh, I am around a lot of farting nuns, apparently, who drink champagne. They're like, that's how
Yeah,
it should sound. Listen.
I mean, it's not great
So,
from a
yes.
from an atmospheric, if you're having a party, whatever. But yeah, like you did it properly. You're supposed to twist the bottle, and it's supposed to just like a small hiss coming out, not a pop. But perfect. Okay.
Indeed, indeed. I like my champagne in my glass and then down the gullet, not all over the room.
That's it. Well, hey, cheers, and thanks for coming on the show.
Cheers. Salud. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me what's the difference between French champagne and domestics, right? And even though they're owned by the same houses, like we have, I think I went to the Tattinger one in Napa. There's Mumm Napa, and there's Roederer
Hmm.
Estate. So they're all sort of owned or co-owned by the parent companies in France. So very similar sort of winemaking techniques and everything. But obviously, what you can't change is this term called terroir, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is the soil and the
Yes.
weather in these areas. And Champagne, especially the hardcore parts of actual Champagne in France, is block chalk underneath the soil. So you've got about 20, 30 meters of soil, and then you've just got this white block chalk, like the stuff you use for blackboards writing back in the day in lecture
Right.
halls. It's amazing. So obviously that imparts a very different taste on the wines. Obviously we've got more sort of clay based sort of alluvial soils around Napa and and Sonoma. So
But
gravel.
this is lovely.
The It's great.
This is Anderson Valley. So correct. It is not absolutely a champagne. This is an American sparkling wine. They talk
Mm.
about the Anderson Valley in Northern California in the back here since 1982, apparently. So they've been doing it for a while. What do they say? Champagne can't be called champagne unless it's from the Champagne region of France. Just
Well,
like,
technically, but in
what is
America,
it?
while Australia abides by this law because we have a like an IP arrangement with France, America does not. So you are allowed to call champagne Champagne as you would in France, even if it's a domestic. We are not allowed to. It's actually illegal in
Ah,
Australia.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know
So
there's plenty of wiggle room. I like to say it's like Schadenfreude, which you can't really call Schadenfreude unless it's from the German region of Schadenfreude. Otherwise,
that's
it's
right.
just happiness at other people's sadness.
That's it. Well, speaking about happy and sadness, what about a bit about you? I've been following you for a little while on the socials, and I really like how you sort of putting some of these concepts in a very easily digestible way into some visuals on the social. I really liked it. Just like, hey, this is the way it is. And a lot of this can be quite galling to people if they're not exposed to it the first time. But over to you. What a quick 1 minute summary of your career to date.
I do. I dumb things down. That is me in a nutshell. What I've done over my career, like I said, I have a PhD in ecology. I was a hardcore scientist, and I realized that a lot of things get buried in academia because they really like long, long words that are insanely precise and ultimately start to lose their actual meaning. So, so when I got into branding and marketing, I realized there's a whole lot that is actually out there about the science of marketing and the science of branding, but most people don't even know it because it's buried and it's lost. And academics have mired it in very long words, like the negative binomial. Um, and so a lot of what I do is simplify and distill and pull things down into their essence so that people can actually use these laws and these levers of brand science.
Perfect. Okay, I love it. That's nice and short and sweet. And you've been doing this with in American clients mostly in North America, because I've noticed a lot of this brand science really isn't as big as it is in the UK and Australia.
Yeah, I think it is still growing here. I don't, there are pockets in America where brand science is pretty hot. And I do have some clients who are really keen on it here in the States. Most of my current clientele is American. I have worked globally. But right now, I do work mostly with US based clients. And I think another reason it's taken a while to catch on here is because honestly, a lot of the originating science came from Australia pre internet, or at least back when the internet was still, typing things and writing in HTML longhand, which I did back in the day. So, yeah, it's still catching on here in the States.
Great. Okay. Well, let's go and do some brand myth busting. What do you think? And we'll go through everything from start to finish and get you taking it.
Love it.
Okay. First things first,
Sounds good.
because this comes up a lot. And simple question, hard to answer. What actually is a brand?
You're right. There are so many questions. It's kind of like what is love or what is pornography. There are many, many definitions and thoughts about what it is. I feel like there's an easy handle, and it's either big B and little b. The big B brand, capital B brand, is it's your reputation. It's everything about you that people know and think of, and their experiences of the product when they were little children with their grandmother, or the latest crisis and the problem with cheating on how your cars go through emissions test or whatever the scandal is. So, big B brand is your entire reputation. Uh, and that requires a product and price and promotion and also advertising, which is a part of it. And then there's little b brand. And little b brand is your logo and your fonts and things like that. And both of them are important because the big B brand is important because if you try and change your reputation by, let's say, an ad campaign without actually changing the quality of your bathrooms in your restaurants, people are going to see through that. On the flip side, if you don't address the little b brand of your logo and your colors, you might get lost on shelf with 20 other products. For instance, I worked with Gillette for a while, and they'd have men come into their lab in Boston and bring in their products. And they said something like 30 to 40% of the time, the men didn't even know what brand product they were using because they were all blue and gray and black and silver. Like those are the color codes for men's shaving products or, deodorant products. And whether it was Edge or Schick or Gillette or whomever else, it was all the same. So you need the little b brand so that people can find you quickly on the shelf, so they can find you quickly in the mall or when they're driving down the freeway and they see signs. Can you recognize what that is right away? So little b brand does matter because I don't know about you, but there are times when I'm like, that was a really good champagne. Which one was it? Well, it had a pink label. I think it had like, handwriting on it. And that's about as far as you get.
Hmm.
And then you find the pink label with the handwriting on it. And you're like, that's the one. So little b brand does matter. But big B brand encapsulates everything. And that's when brand is not just a type treatment and a logo exercise. Big B brand is everything you do as a product or a service.
Well, this is great because I like the way you've kind of separating the two here. Because on the flip side, my next question was, what isn't a brand, or what do people mistakenly confuse brand for in popular business culture that perhaps isn't entirely accurate?
Yeah, the way I think about it is kind of like necessary but insufficient. For instance, people will say, well, I am not my body, right? I cut off my arm and I'm still me. I'm more than my body. But frankly, if you chop away a lot and you're just a head, you're not going to survive. So you need your body, but your body is not sufficient to define who you are. Similarly, I am not my thoughts, but what are you without your thoughts? So thoughts are essential. In that regard, people do say, well, a brand isn't just a logo. This is not a brand, and they put up a logo. And that's true. A brand can be more than a logo, but a logo is an important component of your brand, just like the heart or the lungs. Similarly, I've heard another common definition. A brand is what people think of you. It's what you are in your consumer's mind. And that's great, but that would be zilch without the sexy beauty of an Apple iPhone, right? It doesn't really matter what's in people's minds if there isn't some beautiful, sexy aluminum chassis that just feels good and has that beautiful, simple Apple logo on the back of it. So to say that a brand is a logo is insufficient. It's semi wrong. Or to say that a brand is just what people think of you is also semi wrong. They're incomplete.
Okay, I love it. That's really good because this comes up a lot. I think some marketers they have their brand design guidelines, which is like official document, and perhaps they're separated from the product experience or the product design side of things, and how customers buy and use the product. So they're only allowed to deal with a couple of things, and I think that sort of like eliminates maybe the bigger
Right.
picture of all these different components, all forming this construct, which is ultimately the brand.
Indeed. I have a client right now who has been making a shift in a billion-dollar company, major American brand here. It's been around for 100 years. And she's convincing them that brand is not a division of the company or a function of the marketing team. Brand is what they all serve: product, supply chain, finance. They all serve brand, and they serve it in very different ways. But that's a much more holistic and frankly powerful way to think about brand. It's not the function of a design team or not the function of marketing. Brand is the whole organization, and everybody serves brand.
Well, actually, this is a good point because um, when I found it in organizations, you've got department silos or department divisions and heads, hierarchical sort of thing. But then when you've got something that's very cross-functional, like brand, for example, or growth,
Mhm.
it relies on so many other people's efforts that it is sometimes erroneous to then lump the responsibility into just one person within an organization. You kind of put them in the deep end, and there's a lot of challenges in place of that. So, what do you think about who is responsible for the brand? Where does it stop? Where does it start? This is a bit more complex.
Mhm. It is very complex. I would say ultimately the CEO or the president is really responsible for the brand. It goes all the way to the top, and conversely, it goes all the way to the bottom. Rory Sutherland, I
Hmm.
think, who's from the UK and Ogilvy and has written a beautiful book called Alchemy. He likes to say that the quality and experience, the quality of the experience at a fine dining Michelin starred restaurant depends as much on whether the floor is sticky as whether the foie gras is perfect and has a great apricot jus on it. Because if the floor is sticky, it doesn't really matter how good the foie gras is. So the brand depends upon the person who cleans the floor at the Michelin restaurant. And that's all the way to the bottom, so to speak, to the rank and file, to everybody that touches that brand experience. So brand experience is another way to talk about it. I think experience is one of those words that's completely used to death. Everything is an experience. Well, if you just take the word experience off, it still means the same thing.
Well, exactly.
It's your brand.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. So responsibility is kind of shared. It's a multi-dimensional brand. And now the next thing is let's define some other terms. We've sort of defined what brand is, but then there's this other term called branding, which is the act of branding. And then we've got brand campaigns, rebrands, and brand strategy. Could you maybe delineate or help us like decide exactly what those mean?
Well, depending on how much champagne we want to drink, we could really get into the weeds talking about the words. But in a sense, like if you think about branding, the shape of your bottle or the experience of the foil on the package. Pellegrino, for instance, you know Pellegrino. They have some juices as well, like orange flavored soda, the aranciata, and the limonada, the lemon flavored. They recently redid their packaging to take there was a foil layer on top of the lid of the can, the aluminum can, sorry for those of you from outside the US. And they took that foil off because of cost savings or because maybe it didn't work in vending machines. I don't really know. There were probably a host of reasons to take it off, but it also meant it changed the experience for someone who's drinking it because that foil on top of the lid of the can was a kind of special, precious little silly moment when it's only a $2 soda or whatever it is, but it created, a certain je ne sais quoi about the product to have that foil layer on top. Now that's branding right there, that foil layer. And to remove that foil layer is an act of brand design as well. But that would normally be seen in supply chain and packaging. And so you wouldn't necessarily think, well, that's a branding exercise, and therefore that's the function of the marketing team. So branding is really just the conscious effort being put into, again, the 4 Ps, which I love: product, price, place, promotion. The conscious effort to make sure that what you're delivering to the world is coherent and feels good and is delivering what you want it to deliver.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. Also, it reminds me of Stella Artois, the beer. It has this little paper sort of cap foil, which you rip off. So also serves no
Mm-hmm.
purpose. In fact, on wine, the foil on wine has no purpose these days either, but they leave it on.
Yes.
It used to be to stop cork weevils from going in and burrowing into the cork. But obviously, yeah, exactly. And you'll notice Dom
Yeah, we
Perignon
don't have
says,
cork weevils in my house.
no, we don't. They're not really prevalent anymore. I mean, in fact, natural cork's not really prevalent either. But it's still on there because it's
Right.
a aesthetic thing. It's an opening. It's an unraveling of
Correct.
something. It's a bit of a tease, really. Like going, okay, you need to put some effort into here
Yes.
before you get to the product. And Dom Perignon's foil is
It's
very thin.
right. The whole package design around champagne, it's a great example, actually.
Hmm.
Um, is branding, but we don't think of it as, well, some people don't think of it as branding because it's not a direct communication, an explicit, overt piece of communication. The heft of the bottle, the stopper, the cork. Like as you said, you don't need to use a cork. In fact, a cork is a very poor stopper. You'd be better off with a screw top. But who wants to buy a $300 bottle of champagne and have a screw top? It just feels chintzy. Or who wants to get, a $50 bottle, whatever your price range is. I've never bought a $300 bottle, but who wants to get a $50 bottle and have foil that just doesn't feel like real foil, that feels like plastic? So these are elements that add to the brand and that either subtract or add to what your desired brand is. And all that is branding. But
Okay, so
it's
then
in that case it'd be more in product and packaging.
yes, okay. So then what is a rebrand? Because this term comes up a lot. Generally, when there's a
Mm-hmm.
new head of marketing that is coming into the organization or a new CMO or whatever, one of the first things they
Yep.
do is an agency review, maybe change agencies. They'll do a rebrand, they'll do a website redesign. It's like this sort of classic 1, 2, 3 for various reasons, mostly political. But this term rebrand
Yep.
comes up a lot. What exactly does that mean? And what isn't a rebrand?
Well, when people use that term in that context, right, there's a new CMO, they do think we are going to update and refresh things and we're going to fuss with the logo and change the colors and redesign our packaging and do a campaign that's communicating our values or who we stand for, or our new target audience, which by the way is millennials, because everyone's new target audience is millennials. Um, And that's what is commonly thought of as a rebrand. And that's a very risky and dangerous proposition because as you tinker with the core of a brand, you are eroding or losing all of the equity stored in people's brains. So in America, we have a very famous brand of salt. I don't know if you have it in Australia as well, but it's got a girl with a rain slicker and an umbrella on the logo and galoshes, and everybody instantly knows this salt. I mean, salt is a low interest category, you could say, and it's almost a commodity. But Morton Salt has had this girl on the package for over 100 years. And if someone wants to come in, a new CMO, and rebrand, and refresh it to reinvigorate people's interest in salt, um, it's just going to erode the equity built up in that package. So you have to be really, really careful when you think of something like a rebrand or a brand refresh. Um, and usually people go a little too far in terms of futzing with those things that have made the brand what it is, instead of finding a contemporary way to express that same old greatness.
Okay, and then the last term is a brand campaign, and we'll come back to some of these other myths. But this term gets floated around a lot. I find there tends to be this binary thinking, depending on who you listen to, between shorter term direct response sort of sales activation-y activities that may be a bit more explicit sell or have a stronger call to action or use certain channels, and then the other half, which is a brand campaign which is a bit more higher level, perhaps with a nice glossy 30-second TVC. Sometimes in conjunction with a new CMO or in a rebrand will be a brand campaign that is spearheading this new effort and elevating the brand above and beyond where it was before with, values and some sort of more meta lighter sell and association attached to it. So what is a brand campaign in your mind, and how do people get that wrong?
The way that most people think about a brand campaign is quite simply an intense marketing effort, right? Usually supported by a large media spend and a bunch of TV ads or something like that. But a big integrated campaign that doesn't talk about the product. That's actually kind of how people would define a brand campaign versus any other kind of marketing campaign. And what they think they're talking about, or what they usually want to talk about, are the values of the organization, or the image of the organization and the company and the brand, as opposed to the product itself. Now, that's an extreme version, and the most extreme and one of the most famous is, of course, the Think Different campaign for Apple. And it's mythological, and I really don't want to get into the truth about that campaign. But the belief is that that's what brands need to create meaning and to matter and to sell, frankly. And that you need to do something that's about your values and that connects with people emotionally in that way
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't talk about the product. So that's what is the normal perception of what a brand campaign is. Do they work? Sometimes, absolutely. Sometimes terribly. And that's why I would say that that's a lever, a strategic or creative lever that you can pull, and not a law. There's no law in marketing that says you must run a brand campaign. So it's a lever. Sometimes you pull it and it works great. Sometimes it's a big turd. The other thing about brand campaigns is you can run an extremely healthy, beautiful campaign that builds your brand and creates values and associates you with something contemporary. And it's all about the product. And a great example of that is Dyson. Dyson is basically, you know, pornography of product porn, gorgeous, sexy pictures of ball vacuums that suck up dog hair. That's really what they're showing you. And they don't talk about their values. They don't talk about, you know, whether Marie Antoinette would have been a Dyson person or not, or, you know, whether John Lennon would have been. But it's a very strong brand campaign because those beautiful, sexy shots of these seemingly space age high tech vacuums that no one ever had before, and they certainly didn't look like that. It built the brand. It built up a mystique and an image and a feeling for the brand. It also sold product. And so in Dyson's case, it worked. Would they call it a brand campaign? I don't know. I think they would just call it a campaign, but it did build their brand.
Yeah, see, I've noticed. I think the only valid reason for a brand campaign, if we're talking about bottom line results here, is when there's an attitude or some sort of association that the brand is holding the sales and the brand back from their objective, and that needs to be changed or re-educated in the market. So maybe an old tired brand, fashion brand, needs to be sort of new again and back in the cycle. So I remember Lacoste did a really good sort of brand. It was the alligator polo shirts that you see. So
Mm-hmm.
Lacoste there
Yep.
was a bit of a tired. Your dad back in the '70s sort of wore it, and there was just a new generation that needed to come through and buy it. So they did a really good effort of just completely taking those distinctive brand assets, but then sort of modernizing them, and over a period of time, like became really trendy again, and everyone started buying it.
Yeah.
But there's an organizational effort. But that's what I think of a rebrand. And I think sometimes people go, oh, yeah, let's go this atmospheric sort of value promise or purpose or something like that. That must be what's holding our back. And like, to me, you want to be sure of that by doing a proper diagnosis first. Like, is it actually that? I find sometimes if a marketer wants to avoid any bottom line accountability, a brand campaign is a great way to do it because, well, we're not supposed to sell. That wasn't the aim of the brand campaign. You know what I mean? So, whereas if you have an objective in a campaign that is supposed to sell, then you're totally accountable to the outcome of that campaign. So there's a political element there
Oh,
as well.
well, there's always a political element. And now we're getting into the notion of metrics and accountability. And for sure, I hate the idea that a brand campaign should not sell, because a strong brand campaign that really might change people's feelings about a brand, or better yet, might even make them think of it at all, right?
Hmm.
Uh, that should have an impact on sales, and it should have a fairly early impact. But I mean, there's this metaphor that good brand development is like exercise. It takes time. You don't see your six pack abs until 6 months, right? But the first few times you do it, it just hurts. But you already start to get stronger in very, very small incremental ways. So a brand campaign should absolutely have a short-term impact on sales, but it then is cumulative and creates a long-term impact on the brand, which you don't necessarily get just by piling sales promotion on sales promotion on sales promotion. And actually,
Right.
sales promotions tend to erode the value of brand.
Yeah, and I remember we were talking the other day about this Bud Light thing because it's quite topical right now. And obviously, we're just talking about rebrands and values and maybe pandering and trying to get a new sort of cohort of customers that are coming in that are maybe alienated.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of mentioned this, what Nike did, because Nike also used the same trans influencer for some of their promotional purposes, and Bud Light did, but obviously that went south from the looks of it. We won't know until quarterly sales figures come out, but it looks like the sales are bad enough for two people to be put on leave, which is, a nice way of saying they're kind of getting fired, but they're trying to find an HR excuse to do so.
Right.
So yeah, look, how do rebrands go wrong, and what should Bud Light have done in that case?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Uh, Bud Light is in a very bad category. You know, large premium, or is it premium? I think it's premium light beer. Premium light beer in America is a tanking category.
Hmm.
Um, Everybody really wants craft beer, or they're moving on to spirits, or they're moving on to hard seltzer. So premium light beer is a really hard category to compete in right now. So they are pulling out all the stops to do what they can. And there are a couple things in this case. One of them is they need to appeal to as many drinkers as they can, whatever their political ideology, whatever their gender. They want to appeal to women as much as men. And Bud Light marketing to women sometimes pisses off men. So in this case, you've got the very direct thing of they actually need to expand their buyer base. They need more
Yeah.
buyers because not enough people are buying Bud Light. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what is their brand associating with, and are there any cultural meanings or cultural signifiers that the brand is trying to be a part of? Now, Bud Light has been, as far as I know, been a part of queer culture for decades. They have supported pride marches and parades. They have supported all kinds of activities for local nonprofits and for local organizations and national ones. So this is nothing new for Bud Light to be part of a queer or connected with a queer organization or person or cause. Uh, the trans element of that movement is certainly the newest, and in America certainly is a big lightning rod culturally. So they went for it anyway and stepped on the lightning rod, and apparently some people got wind and it pissed them off, and so there's a big tempest in a teapot about Bud Light not suddenly, well, people say suddenly supporting these people. Well, no, they've been supporting them forever. And I'm going to stop drinking Bud Light and go to Coors. Well, guess what Coors does? Coors supports queer culture as well, and probably supports trans culture as well. Um, so you've got the two things. On the one hand, Bud Light has to appeal to as many people as possible. So they need to keep their audience lens really wide. The second piece, though, is this cultural signifier piece. And there it's a little harder. It's harder to navigate. There are these third rails that can be really dicey. I like to say, it would be just as dicey for Ben and Jerry's or Patagonia to support a gun show as it would be for Bud Light potentially to support a trans spokesperson like Dylan Mulvaney. And so when you're trying to make a brand contemporary and appeal to a broad audience, you really have to at least connect with that broad audience. So that's a targeting issue or a media issue. But then you have to find things that do appeal to a really, really wide group. A brand that did that really successfully a decade ago was Snickers. In America, the Snickers campaign launched with Betty White, who's an 80-year-old actress, getting leveled in a game of football on a Super Bowl commercial. And it turns out it wasn't Betty White. The guy was just acting like a Betty White because he's not himself when he's hungry. And so the campaign, You're Not You When You're Hungry, became a global sensation. It had universal appeal. It had a really fun, light, not quite snarky, but snarky touch to the banter. Like there's always someone in your group that's acting like a diva.
Mm.
And it turns out the solution is they're hungry and they need to have a Snickers. So it was a very broadly appealing campaign that grew the brand, I think, double digits around the world and kind of gave the brand a refreshed, modern, contemporary feel. They didn't have to go into identity politics to do that. And so there are lots of ways to get there. But Bud Light's trying. They're trying everything they can. And they did this tiny, 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 tiny program with Dylan, and it's gotten blown all the way out of the water
Yeah, well, I
because
think
it's
that's what people
political.
miss. Like, it's just two clips of a very much larger campaign, which just some people took the wrong way and then blew it up as a political statement, and then it sort of went south from there. So I think what the marketing people got right there is like yes, and I saw her podcast interview. I think shortly thereafter, it seems based on her body language that she was in hot water
You
already.
mean the CMO or the marketing
Yes,
director's interview?
yes.
Yeah.
And I think she got some things right. Like we need to appeal to a broader base. Yes, the brands are sort of like declining, and then I think there's a couple of I don't know what happens, but sometimes agencies are in their own little bubble, perhaps, and then they sell this idea from their own bubble, and then I think sometimes the clients don't double check that is the case, and go, actually, does that apply to the broader market or not? And that's the danger sometimes of selling ideas or buying ideas off vendors without maybe double checking the application and the risk. But yeah, it's an
Absolutely.
interesting thing that happened. But I think there was a couple of conclusions that she made in that were probably not true, and then went ahead with that and maybe trusted those opinions, and then it sort of like unfortunately blew up in their face. But I'm just reminded of this VB commercial, this Australian beer as well, which I think the devil here is in the execution as well. I think the Mulvaney, or what was it, Dylan Mulvaney, I think
Dylan
that could
Mulvaney.
be executed in a slightly different tone or slightly different way and not being an issue. Like it's just so subtle, like the way you would execute that. And I think this VB ad in Australia, I think I sent you the link to it. I think that does that in a very good way, like can be inclusive and then also not alienate or annoy sort of those other fratty people that are the base of the brand. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Execution is so hard. I think it's Bob Hoffman who is one of the grandfathers of advertising and is known as the ad contrarian. He likes to talk about why um, advertising is often so much shit and why people hate it so much. And one of the reasons is good advertising is hard.
Mm.
It's as hard, if not harder, than making a good movie. And you know how many bad movies there are? Or pop songs, right? How many really good pop songs are there, and how many really bad pop songs can you hear on Spotify now?
Mm.
Lots. So good advertising is hard. The execution matters. Getting the tone just right really matters. That's my dog. If you can't hear
Oh,
her.
nice.
Um, and
I
and
think he
so
agrees. He or she agrees.
yeah, she totally agrees that execution really does matter, and getting the execution just right really does matter. Hold on, I'll get her out of here so we can get back to the conversation. Go ahead, Tom. Good girl. An example of that, which I adore, is a B2B ad, which is another topic we can get to, John.
Mm.
A B2B ad, not just a B2B ad, but a product demo. A product demo for a B2B product, which costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's actually a beautiful video that racked up 90 million views because the execution was flawless. And this is the Jean-Claude Van Damme epic split for Volvo.
Mm.
And if you've not seen it, it's worth a watch because it has two trucks, semi trucks, lorries, going backwards. Van Damme is standing on the side mirrors of each of them, and then the trucks go wide, just enough, and then keep going precisely. So it's a demo of how precision steering works. And then Van Damme does a split.
Mm.
And the lighting is perfect. Van Damme is perfect. The writing is perfect. And the coup de grace, the pièce de résistance of that execution to me was using Enya as the soundtrack.
Mm.
And everybody's heard that song. Who can say where the road
Yeah.
goes, where the time goes, only time, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just perfect execution. F&B did that. F&B from Sweden put that
Oh.
ad together. And talk about rocking a B2B ad. Talk about rocking a product demo. That's how you make something interesting. They didn't need a brand campaign to talk about Volvo's values. They turned a B2B product demo into an amazing brand building opportunity. It was great.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, I think it's really important that distinction there. Now, coming back to some more terms as well, I just saw here a lot of people ask me this as well, and this comes from Martin Neumeier, which is an interesting sort of brand design guy in San Diego, I think he is, or somewhere in California. Anyway, he
Mm-hmm.
and other academics talk about this inside out versus outside in sort of thinking. So, a brand isn't what we say it is; it's ultimately what the consumers say it is, no matter what we do. And there's these
Mm-hmm.
two terms that sort of get floated around: brand identity and brand image. Can you explain what they are and the difference?
Oh man, I'll try. I'll do this. I'll try and I'll try and explain what I think Marty's talking about, and then I'll talk about what I understand from the science. Because again, as a scientist, I like to say, what's the evidence show us, as opposed to what's our theory? What does the data actually say? And that's qualitative and quantitative data, historical as well as modern data. But what's the evidence really say about this? So you said brand image versus
Brand identity.
brand identity.
Mm.
Okay. There's probably a distinction in terms of your identity might be something you talk about internally at the company. Like
Mm.
we want to be the blah, 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 the premier blah, blah, blah. And these are our values, blah, blah, blah. Brand image is then what you project to the world about what your brand kind of looks and feels like. So if you're a fancy champagne company and you have an image to uphold, then you make sure to have really ritzy events, and you are the people who sponsor the Lamborghini shows and things like that. And so you create this image. Now, I'm a firm believer that the inside and the outside should be as close as possible, because otherwise you get kind of schizoid. And so when it comes to the science suggests that, first of all, most people have no clue what your brand image is. Most people don't give a damn. Most people are too busy worried about what's for dinner, or why is the dog barking, or, are my parents okay? And there's lots of evidence to show that people have very, very little image of a brand before they buy it. That actually most people's perceptions of a brand only really start to kick in after they've bought it. And before that, it's just, I don't know. It's maybe a logo. I've maybe heard of it. And you don't have strong feelings either way. So the brand image is actually much, much more important for people who've already bought you, which gets us to an interesting little tidbit from brand science. When we think about the function of advertising, one of the secret functions of advertising is to reinforce people's past purchases, not to get them to buy you again. But let's say I just bought this Roederer Estate sparkling wine from Anderson Valley that's now dripping on my toes. I want to make sure that this was a good purchase for $38 US. And I want to feel good that I bought something good. So if I see George Clooney drinking this in an ad, I'm going to feel pretty sophisticated. And suddenly I'm going to feel good about it. So the brand image actually often matters a lot more to your current buyers than to your future buyers. So that's a piece of the brand science. I don't know enough about what else Marty says about brand identity versus brand image.
Oh, well,
But
basically, he just says, look, brand image is the image, customers have in their mind. So it's their interpretation of what you're trying to communicate. And then brand identity is kind of what you say we're about. And that's expressed in, your product and communications, all that kind of thing. So, like, ultimately, his
there
point
you
is,
go.
like, it's the image that matters, not what you say, what you're trying to do, but what actually gets across in people's memories.
That does bring up a good point, because the best case scenario is that those things are basically the same. That Roederer Estate wants to be a premium brand. They present themselves, their image as one, and then the identity is also presented as a premium brand. The times that it's bad is when you're presenting yourself as A and people see you as Q. So you want to present yourself as the brand for smart people, and people think you're a piece of shit. Or you want to present yourself as,
and you think, all our customers are like luxury brand buyers, blah blah, and you do the customer analysis and you go, oh, actually they're kind of just cheap people, and what the hell? And then it's this weird sort of when it happens, I find it's this galling kind of ego trip moment within the organization, and they go, oh, actually most people don't care about us, and they're not who we're trying to project to, and like and then it's this sort of buyer's remorse almost that happens, this cognitive dissonance that causes issues, I find, with politically.
Well, here's a good example of that, and this again comes from the science. And what I like to do when I talk about the laws and levers, and that's my framework. Laws are things that really do apply to every brand, every category, luxury to commodities, B2B versus B2C. Levers are things that may work, may not work sometimes, don't work others. You can choose and pick and choose. One of the laws is that if you do things that decrease the perceived value of your brand, people think your brand is cheap. And an example of that is, well, two examples. One is, of course, price discounts. So if your Roederer Estate champagne is always 70% off, and you can get it for $13 even though it lists for $20, or if you've got some product that's always on deep discount, you are eroding the perceived quality and value of your brand. The second example of that, which is also brand science, is that where you sell, your distribution, your place, it's the number 2P of the 4Ps, your place impacts the perceived quality of your brand as well. So if Rotorua Estate wants to be seen as a premium brand, but it's being sold at drugstores and discount stores for 70% off, guess what? People don't think it's a premium brand anymore. And that is often right internal dissonance and political problems inside the company, which means because your reputation outside the company is, oh yeah, they want to be a premium brand, but they're a piece of shit.
Another good example is because I do only work in services, but in software. So if you hire certain consulting firms, like some of the big ones like EY, Deloitte, etc., they'll recommend enterprise stacks like Oracle, Salesforce, etc. They're not going to be recommending things like HubSpot and other likes, which are a bit more mid-market and smaller business markets. So again, like that's another
Mm-hmm.
distribution avenue for your software in a consulting gig. And I found HubSpot and everything like that is more recommended by more digital agencies or sort of medium stack agencies, not the consultants of that sort of more enterprise side. So yeah, another example.
Absolutely. The science of brand positioning is fascinating. Um, 2 points out of that, which I'll add, which again apply to almost every single category around the world, and every single type of product or service. One of them is that this notion of positioning for different values happens and matters a lot less than marketers think. So I'm the brand for the proletariat, for the working class people, for the hard scrabble Americans, versus I'm the brand for the fancy hoity-toity, urban, sexy, techie bro.
Yeah.
That distinction is much less common and prevalent. And when you really, again, look at your own data, you find out that you share customers. And so that kind of positioning doesn't really matter as much. The only kind of positioning that seems to rise to the top over and over and over is tiered positioning or price tiers.
Mm.
And even there's a whole lot of overlap, but quite simply, Lamborghini is at a very different position in the market than Kia. And both of those are at a different position than Toyota. And that's a very reliable type of positioning that almost everyone in the world as a buyer, as a shopper, intuitively understands. So just like you're saying with services, if you're the Lamborghini of consulting, then you're going to find an email service and a website service and a CRM service that's up there at the Lamborghini level. You're not going to say, we want something at the Toyota level, or we're going to bring in some commodity level, entry level email service like, Kia. Because emotionally and functionally, there are actual differences at the extremes of the price tiers. So that is some more of the science of brands
Yeah, great.
and
Okay, no, I love
positioning.
that. Yeah, I love that whole sort of yeah. It's weird that whole positioning. Let's have a persona. Let's go out premium, and then you do this comms campaign, and then you realize, oh, actually, our buyers aren't who we're talking about. So what are we doing? Sometimes that's intentional. I found so with luxury brands, and this is probably one of the exceptions to that rule. Luxury brands often their biggest buyers are light buyers, are people who can't actually really afford to buy more than one piece, but they buy that piece. So they could be suburban people with not much money, but they buy that piece as like a brand statement. Like, okay, I can't afford everything, but it's always the one with the biggest logo or the one that's like the most obvious branded luxury piece, handbag or shoes or Balenciaga with a big Balenciaga thing. Like that's their buyer group, even though those people aren't of high income. So it creates this weird dichotomy. It's like you got to position this way, but also ignore the fact that because it's an aspirational purchase, you're going to ignore the fact that most of your buyers are not luxury kind of people. So it's funny.
Right. That's a great example. I posted about this recently when it came to shampoo, that you see the same cross purchase across different price tiers. You'll have lower income people buying high price shampoo and higher income people buying budget shampoo because, again, brands tend to share customers a whole lot more than they think they do. Now, that doesn't mean that your brand shouldn't be positioned somewhere in the market. So if you're a luxury shampoo, then it would be really weird to people and dissonant for you to offer something super cheap. But you should assume, as a brand manager of a luxury brand, just like you're saying, some of your buyers are going to be mid-income, some are going to be low income, and that's okay. But the brand image, going back to Marty, the brand image should be coherent and it should behave properly as a luxury brand.
Yep. Okay, so
Yeah.
we've kind of mentioning a couple of these myths, and let's just bust a couple more. So I know we've been sort of working on this a tiny bit together, but you've got some really good ones here as well. But I think let's just go over myth number one, where you said the goal or the pinnacle is like brand love or like soul loyalty. Where maybe the ego of the firm is projected through their efforts. So, what does brand science say around that?
The science seems to show that if you want a really healthy brand, number one, you've got to get good profit margins because profits drive the business. And then number two, you want to increase the number of buyers. You need to get more buyers. And as you get more buyers, your average loyalty level goes up. So loyalty and penetration are actually synchronized. They move in lockstep. What you don't necessarily need is passionate love of a small fan base. Unless, again, you've got really crazy margins, because profit is really the name of the game. An example in America is Harley Davidson, which is a motorcycle brand. People see it as this fanatical passion brand that only hardcore Harley riders buy Harleys and no one else does. When you look at the data, you see just the opposite. You see that Harley depends a lot on people that buy one Harley, and depends a little bit on people that buy one or two Harleys, but also have a Honda or a BMW or a Suzuki in their garage, or people that buy 3 or 4 or 5 Harleys, but the dirty secret is they have a garage of 8 or 10 bikes. So love and loyalty, it's kind of like shooting for the North Star, right? That you're never literally going to hit a star in the sky, but it's maybe good navigational point, because a healthy brand doesn't rely on love and doesn't rely on crazy outsized loyalty. What it relies on is healthy profit margins, which means running a good business, and then getting more customers. That's what the science says. So you're going to have to always go and find new customers, grow your customer base, replace customers that leave you, and help find new customers that come in at a heavy buy rate. So that's one of the biggest ones. This whole love, brand loyalty. That's a terrible myth.
Okay, and then I think added to that, you did mention this, like Harley, a motorcycle person will have one Harley, but they also have a Kawasaki, or they might have a Suzuki bike as well. So I think the other myth is that we have this exclusive pool of customers that only buy us and they don't buy our direct competitors.
Correct. That's another big myth, that you want sole loyalty. And again, that's the goal. I was presenting recently at South by Southwest, and there were maybe, I don't know, 400 or 500 people in the room. And I asked who has a favorite brand of jeans, and that's all they buy. And sure enough, there's always someone in the audience who loves Levi's, and they die for Levi's, and that's all they've ever bought. And I said, that's great. That's great. So you buy a lot of Levi's and that's all you have in your closet. He said, yeah. And I said, and I picked on him. I said, so tell me about your underwear. And he was taken aback. And I said, what brand of underwear do you have? And he says, I don't know. And I said, you mean you don't know what brand you have, or whether you're wearing underwear? And he realized that Levi's makes apparel, because I showed him, Levi's makes apparel head to toe. You can wear nothing but Levi's. But he fancied himself a brand loyalist because he only bought Levi's. And as marketers, we look in our lives and our homes and our closets, and we key in on the one thing that we're loyal about. And that's what, therefore, we want to do with our brand and business. But that's not common. That's not normal. In fact, 95% of the people in the room had at least 2 brands of jeans in their closet, and sometimes upwards of 10 or 11. There were a couple people I picked on who indeed had 10 or 11 different brands of jeans, it turns out they were the heaviest jeans buyers. That is one of the laws. Again, laws versus levers. One of the laws is if you're a brand that's not fully a subscription or fully monopoly, like water or electricity, then the more people buy of your category, the more brands they like to buy. I'm really into spirits. So, for instance, vermouth. I have a lot of vermouth in my house. A nice, really nice Spanish sipping vermouth and other spirits as well. If you're really into hot sauce, you probably buy lots of brands of hot sauce. So there's a myth that we want pure loyalty. And that's actually the exception. It's rare and it's not essential for a healthy brand and a healthy business.
Hmm. You know, the only exception I've seen to this, which maybe skews a bit more into that myth category, is where the product creates their own ecosystem. So, like Apple people, there are benefits to
Mm-hmm.
having Apple phone syncing with the Apple laptop, even though a lot of people who have iPhones have non-Apple laptops and such because you're used to Windows or whatever. But once you've got this ecosystem effect, I find it does kind of create a higher benefit for them to sort of buy within your category. But that's when you have multiple product lines; they all sort of co-complement one another. I find so.
Absolutely. The way I like to talk about these laws is that there are two things you can do since you're constrained by them. Like, let's say there's a line that, a curve, and all the brands fit on that curve, from the little itty bitty brands, like some tiny electronic brand that's doing cool custom made speakers, to the really, really big ones like Bose. And you're on this line. Well, there are two choices. One is you climb the ranks. And that's rare because most categories are fairly stable. Most categories are fairly mature. So it's rare to see a brand really climb the ranks from 10th best brand to second biggest brand. It does happen. Tito's vodka in America has completely blown through the ranks and become the number one vodka in America, which is hilarious because vodka is tasteless, odorless, and colorless and basically a commodity. But they did it. So that's one thing you can do is climb the ranks. And that's rare and hard work and it's admirable and you should try it. The second thing, though, when it comes to understanding the laws of brand growth, is there's wiggle around these laws. So, for instance, like I said earlier, your loyalty rate is correlated with your household penetration. So, the more buyers you have, the more loyal they tend to be. So, in cars in America, the biggest brands are Toyota and Ford and Honda. And they also happen to have highest household penetration and also the highest loyalty. Subaru is about half their size, but they have a much higher level of repeat purchase than you would expect given their size. Now, they're not breaking the law of nature. They're not breaking the brand science laws. They have found a lot of wiggle and they have capitalized on that. And they've done it out of 10 or 20 different things they do. There's not one reason. There's not just one big brand campaign that made them more meaningful to millennials or something like that. The one brand millennials aren't killing. But Subaru has found wiggle. And you know who's really in the crapper right now is Dodge. Dodge has much lower repeat purchase than you would expect given their size. So there is wiggle around the laws. And that's a cumulative result of lots of different branding and product and pricing activities. And then there is climbing the ranks. So those are really the two big ways to improve and to grow. And again, it's margins as well as volume.
Okay, well, I really like the next myth because this is probably the biggest one that I find people who don't understand how marketing advertising works. And that is that advertising persuades people that the product is better and that they should buy, and somehow it forces them to buy. What does science say around that?
Yeah, the science of advertising itself, I think, is still in the early phases, even though it's 40 years, 50 years old, because we're still trying to understand it, because advertising is very slippery. But what we do know of the science of advertising so far is that it's a weak force, kind of like gravity is technically a weak force, even though it keeps us all here on the planet's surface. Um, but it's usually applied very weakly. It's used very poorly, so it's even weaker than it could be. And that's because people believe advertising persuades. That I go out there and I do an ad and it showcases how much better my champagne is or how much louder my dog is. Come on, dog. Come on. Come on, get in here. Join the podcast. And that my job is to persuade people that Roederer is a better champagne. And it turns out that the science seems to be showing us, it's not definitive, but the science seems to be showing us that in general, what advertising is doing is first and foremost reminding you that the brand even exists. That's one of the first jobs of advertising because most people forget there's thousands of brands now. There's too many brands. The second thing that advertising does is create maybe a positive feeling about a brand. Do I feel good about it or bad about it? Is Julia Roberts in the ad? And if Julia Roberts is in the ad, I'm going to feel pretty good about it because I feel good about Julia Roberts. So those are a couple of the basic things that advertising does. It reminds people you exist at all. And then it creates either a good or bad feeling about the brand. The third thing, which a brand does, and Paul Feldwick, who's a very storied brand strategist from the UK, likes to say is that advertising also helps create a kind of common knowledge of what a brand is. So for instance, if I show up to your house, John, and I'm bringing a really weird bottle of champagne that you've never heard of, who knows what you're going to think of it? But if I show up to your house and I've got Veuve Clicquot with that nice, beautiful orange label, and it comes maybe even in the box, it's Veuve Clicquot. You know what it means. I know what it means. And I know what you know that you know what it means. And you know that I know that you know that I know what it means. So it becomes a shared piece of symbology in our relationship. And that's frankly why Super Bowl ads are important still, and why several people have said, and I think rightly so, no one seems to have really built a global brand doing one-to-one personalized advertising in social media, because you can't have an understanding that there's a shared meaning. If I show up with this cool new brand, are you going to know what it means too? So it needs to be public, and there's a public element of advertising that creates the shared meaning. So again, the science is still new, but the science of advertising itself seems to suggest advertising doesn't persuade. And you should stop trying, and it frees you. You don't have to try to persuade. It's a lovely freeing feeling. Oh my God, I don't have to persuade someone that my product is better. I mean, if it is, that's cool. And you can do it in a cool way with Jean-Claude Van Damme doing a split between two trucks to Enya. But the job of advertising is not to persuade. And that's a big myth. The job of advertising is to remind and to engender good feelings.
Yeah, because that's exactly the way it's sold by agencies. It's like, well, we'll do this brand campaign and we'll persuade people to buy and you'll get sales as a result. Like the science says pretty much all of that statement is wrong. Yeah, it's a very common thing. Where do you think this comes from?
Yeah.
Like this Mad Men shows, or just decades of agency vendor relationships pushing the same sort of sales pitch? Or
I'm going to go back to Rory Sutherland a little bit because he is very vocal about this idea of why people do these things in companies. He's not the only originator of it, but he's a good vocal explainer of it, which is that if you're in a large organization and you're working for Pernod Ricard, which probably owns Veuve Clicquot, I'm going to make it up. I don't know. Do they, John? You probably know.
No, LVMH own Veuve Clicquot, but it doesn't matter. They own They own more than some other brands. Yeah.
Okay, Louis Vuitton. So you work for Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, LVMH, and you're selling Veuve Clicquot. You've got lots and lots of really wicked smart people around you who need you to justify your decisions and rationalize your decisions for how you spend hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising. And if you go in there and say, yeah, we're not going to persuade people, we're just going to, have a video of Charlize Theron drinking champagne, drinking, Louis Vuitton, they're going to say that's stupid. Or better yet, and this is a real example. Let's say you work for an insurance company, and insurance is, of course, logical and linear and analytical, and it's an expensive purchase, and there are all these facts about it. And your brand linkage in your ads is a crappy 5%. And 95% of the time, people don't even remember which brand your ad was for. And you go in and say, you know what? We're gonna introduce a talking duck. That's gonna do the trick. People are gonna think you're an idiot. And they're not gonna believe that a talking duck is gonna help sell a logical product, service product like insurance. But the Aflac campaign with the duck that screams, Aflac, got them from a 5% brand linkage to a 70% brand linkage. 70. Category average was 8%. They did it with a duck. Aflac. Yes, Gilbert Gottfried's voice. Rest in peace, Gilbert Gottfried. You can't sell that in a logical way. There's no rational board of directors or C-suite that's going to say, that sounds logical. So it's really, really hard to do these things that actually work with the human brain, because the human brain is not logical for 90% of us and 99% of the time. But if you're in the boardroom, if you're a marketing director and you've got to justify and rationalize your choices, you lean on these logical, rational things.
Yeah,
I think that's why it happens so much.
yeah, it's a good point. Okay. And what about, I mean, we sort of did mention this, but myth number 4 is that good, brand work doesn't do a hard sell, and that there is this choice between brand versus selling. What do you say to that, and what does science say?
The science seems to say that there are some kind of different extremes, kind of like pricing extremes. There are some different extremes between some things which really help create an image of the brand and some things that are very, very hard selling, but that more often there's an overlap. That depending on how you do your hard sell message, you're creating a brand, you're creating an image, you're impacting how people feel about you by how you do that hard sell. And I know Les
Mm.
Benet. I still don't know how to pronounce his last
I think
name.
it's Binet, actually. Les Binet. Yeah. Anyway.
But Les and the team from the IPA have talked a lot about the long versus the short, branding versus selling, and it's a bit of a bit of a false dichotomy, like body mind,
Mm.
right? That at the extreme you can see the differences, but the science seems to suggest that there's actually a fair bit of overlap, and that if you do good branding work, it sells, and if you do good selling work, it builds your brand. An example of that that's been in the news lately is Airbnb, who recently, in the past couple of years, I guess, has moved a lot of money out of sales level performance type marketing. I don't know if it was actually performance, but nonetheless, bottom of funnel kind of selling type work to more top of funnel branding, attitudes, getting people to feel a certain thing about the brand campaign work. And they found that it sells a lot. It actually helped them sell. Shocker. So that there's a connection there. Mark Ritson, who was another strategy wonk like us, he likes to talk about bothism, that it's not one or the other, it's both. So it's bothism. And the science does seem to support that notion that there is a lot of overlap and that they're fairly entangled. And if you do it right, then your bottom of funnel work still helps build your brand, and your top of funnel work still helps sell.
Mm. Well, yeah. I mean, my argument is like if the ad is branded, it's still building your brand, and it creates a sale. A sale can build your brand because creates a product experience for that person who then tells somebody else about it, or their neighbor sees them using that product or service, and they go, "Oh, where do you get that from?" "Oh, this is blah blah blah." That builds your brand. So distribution and
Absolutely.
purchases build brand as much as ad campaigns sometimes. But anyway,
Absolutely. If God forbid you do something like a coupon, um, the quality of the coupon, the physical weight and touch and tactile experience of your coupon can impact the perceived value of your brand.
okay, and you've got myth number 5 here, that
Yeah.
marketing is advertising. This is funny because I did a recent meme about this. It's the Gwyneth Paltrow meme. When I think there was a ski accident with someone
Yes.
in Utah. She was at Deer Valley, I think it was.
Hmm.
And someone ran into her and then tried to sue her for damages or something. Anyway, and there's this moment where she leans over him in the courtroom and says something, and there's this meme that went around. So I created one that marketing isn't advertising. But what does science say about this? Because I think there's a really wide myth, I think, in a lot of companies.
Yeah. This is probably a little less about science and just a little more about business management, in that a lot of people think marketing is advertising. Like if you're in the marketing department, you create the ads, you do the promotions, you do the sampling programs, things like that. But when it comes to more mature, sophisticated brand management and business management, you realize that your distribution is marketing, right? Where you are sold is a huge element of your marketing mix and impacts your brand. So if you're sold at high-end luxury stores, that's really different than if you're sold at department stores or discount stores. Uh, or how much distribution you have matters as much, if not more, than your ads. So if you're only in 600 stores across the country, you got some shit to do. And maybe what matters more is getting into 6,000 or 60,000 stores, as opposed to worrying about what your latest, influencer campaign is. So I think it's a little bit less about the science and a little bit just more about the concepts and the sophistication, that an unsophisticated person would say marketing is just advertising. And a sophisticated marketer would say marketing is all of those activities you do to create a market and serve that market competitively in a way that helps your brand win. And that's, again, I love the 4 Ps. It's old, it's an oldie but a goodie: product, price, place, promotion. And the promotion one is where advertising fits. So it's just one little sliver.
Yeah, I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
And last myth I think that we both agree on here is that, again, it's coming sort of back to this sort of ego or marketing hubris, is that people want to have relationships with brands and love and such like that.
Oh man. Well, let me just start by telling you about the relationship I have with my bleach brand. Clorox bleach and I go way back. Clorox and I have a love affair that started when I was a little boy, and I was with my grandma, and she was pouring the bleach into the laundry, and I got some in my eye, and it stung like hell. And ever since then, I've had a strong, strong relationship with Clorox, which is why I follow Clorox on Instagram and I check out my bleach brand's influencer campaign, because I want to make sure that the people I think are influential buy the same bleach that I buy. And it's, well, as you can see, I'm being very facetious, because this is a myth. This was a myth that was very much propagated at the beginning. Well, not just at the beginning of social media, but it was fueled very much so by the lighter fluid of social media. That now that your bleach brand can be on Facebook and people can like it and follow it and see your updates, people are going to want a relationship with your bleach brand. And I use bleach as an example because it's almost a joke. But I just showed some data for one of the world's biggest love brands, Nike. In America, Nike has 170 million buyers, which is roughly half the population, or at least owners. 170 million people in America, which is half the population, own Nike product. Out of that, On TikTok, which is, of course, the world's sexiest platform, how many followers does Nike have? 3 million. Out of that, how many people watched on average the latest 10 TikToks that Nike put up there? Maybe 100,000. Out of that, how many of them actually liked it or, emojied it? Maybe 10,000. Out of that, how many commented? Maybe 100. So here's one of the coolest brands in the world that everyone thinks everyone wants to have a relationship with. And out of 170 million people who own a piece of Nike gear, 100 of them actually cared to comment on their latest TikToks. And I use that as an example because if that's what it is for Nike, then think of what it is for Clorox. It's a much steeper curve, which again goes back to this idea that people don't really care about your brand that much. Love and loyalty are not the goal, and that people don't want a relationship with your brand. Once in a while, the exception is that people want a relationship. Like maybe you've got a deep feeling for one brand of cosmetic that was so important in your life because at that time it changed how you feel, or one restaurant because that's where you proposed to your spouse. And that, really, I think if you had polled most people, you and me included, or even the millennials, they probably actually have a relationship with 2 or 3 brands in their life out of 200 or 300 brands that they actually buy. So it's a myth. People don't want a relationship with their brand. They want their brand to do a good job and then shut the hell up. And then, what we want a relationship with is people that we care about.
But this is I know. And while this is the truth, though, this is a really hard sell. Like, would you go into a company and go, look, people don't care about your products. Yeah, they're okay. People buy them. Your brand, yeah, most people don't care. If you're trying to sell something, like as a marketing vendor or even a marketer, and you're going with that sort of like stone cold fact, it's not going to get anyone excited about anything, is it? They're just going to almost want to go the opposite way. So my point about a lot of this brand science and marketing science is that it's a hard sell politically, unless you have a
Yeah,
culture that is respondent to that level of this is the way the world is and how it works, which I find is very, very rare.
it is. I've had some success, John, with the freeing elements of brand science. Because you're right. A lot of the how brands grow, Ehrenberg Bass kind of brand science fundamentalism makes people really sad. Like, oh, no one cares about our brands. Loyalty doesn't matter. Um, our customer's no different than your customer. As Adam Ferrier, who's a marketer from Australia, once said, it seems like some of the stuff just says you need to, rigorously apply your logo to everything, and that's all you got to do. And that's terrible and lame. But what I like about bringing this stuff to clients and what I've had success with is that if you accept the fact that most people don't want a relationship with you, you also can stop fretting about every social media post. You can stop worrying about whether or not your ad campaign launches before your brand logo refreshes out there. You can stop freaking out about the fact that your brand awareness levels are here, but then what people know of you is really low. It's freeing. It can be freeing and then you can get to the real work, and the real work grows your margins and grows your business. And that's fun. That's exciting because then you get bonused. Then you can actually have office parties. Then you can actually add a new wing to your corporate headquarters and have the cool lab down in the trendy hipster district of town. And that's all good stuff. So what I find is that the laws and levers approach to brand science that I provide um, is a little sobering for sure. And it is myth busting, like we've talked about here. But ultimately, it's freeing, and it helps you realize you've been trying to push water uphill, and no wonder you're exhausted. Guess what? If you stop trying to make water flow uphill, life is better. And you can actually ride the flow of the current downstream and have a lot more fun.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that actually, because obviously I'm a proponent, but I'm very selective with clients that I sort of talk about these things to. Like a lot of them, they don't care. I deal with executives, so it's the CEO or the CFO or the founder or the business owner. They don't care about a lot of the stuff. They just care about like commercially, does it push us forward or not? There is an element of an ego element that comes in that should always, I think, you be sensitive to in terms of like there are some things that the CEO wants to see their brand and a logo. They want a publicity piece written about them, what other people talk about them, like that. Also galvanizes the team, has a bit of a halo effect, even though it may not produce sales long term or have a sustained effect. There is, I think, a small percentage of all your work that needs to pander to, the internal sort of politics side of things. And what proportion of that I think you allocate your time and resources to is the question. And that I think is quite dependent on the type of company. But yeah, I'm with you. If you can affect the commercial figures, you get so much more respect, especially from the CFO, which is generally the right hand man or woman of the CEO. So you get on side with them, you get on side with the CEO, you get on side with the board, you're trusted, and you get less kickback, and you'll stick around, you'll get promoted, you'll get more money. It's easy. But yeah, you need to win that
Indeed.
trust. And I think if you maybe follow your advice and in some of these scientific laws of branding, you can stay away from the things that don't matter, that don't have any commercial effect, which I think a lot of teams preoccupy themselves with. But I just want to get, because I deal with privately owned businesses which are on that sort of medium scale. So generally when they get to about 100 mil ARR is when I tap out. And generally that's when they're getting acquired or bought out or IPO or something like that. But I find it's very different. The things I would focus on for a small brand just getting started, maybe a startup or a new business idea, to then a medium-sized business, to then corporate, so larger sized business. So I want to get from you, like just off the top of your head, if there's like a brand MVP or like minimum viable brand things that apply regardless of whether you're just starting out, how much money you have, like, hey, this is what you need to get started. And then these things you probably want to look at when you get a bit bigger and concentrate on. And then when it goes corporate, these are the kind of things that you should be focusing
Mm. Brand MVP, minimum viable brand, MVP. I think that when you're just getting started, you probably need some fundamentals for little b brand so people can actually find you and see that you're different. And then you need to deliver on some of the other fundamentals that drive the whole category. So if you create champagne, it's got to be crisp, it's got to be flavorful, it's got to have a nice experience of opening it with the
on.
foil and the cork, right? You got to hit some of those. Now, if you're going to be different and you're going to create something that's distinctive and unique, that's pretty useful too. But you're always going to be straddling the category drivers with things that differentiate you or make you stand out. And a lot of those are going to be kind of functional. Packaging will probably be a big one.
Yeah, because
So
I think Peter,
MVB, I'd say that.
yeah, and on top of that, I think like Peter Thiel says in his book Zero to One, again, because I do mostly work in tech and services. He says, don't worry about investing in brand until you're 50 mil ARR kind of thing. And I think that is somewhat directionally true, but also a tiny bit false. I find when people are just starting out, the founders are the brand. They're the people selling it. They're the people selling it to investors. Like they embody the brand. And the small business is the same. Sometimes it is the key founder or organizer that then they need, when they get a bit bigger, to separate themselves out from the organizational sort of brand a bit, because that's key personnel risk. So I think like they're investing in themselves in a way. So they are investing in brand, but it's just a bit more subtle. I think what Peter Thiel's trying to say is like, don't invest in brand advertising campaigns until you're of a certain
Correct.
size, because it's like you've got bigger fish to fry, if you know what I mean, and distribution problems and product problems to work through and all that kind of thing.
Product. Right. And so this gets back to the 4Ps, right? That you have to assume that brand is what the whole organization serves, and brand is not a division of the design department. That even those startups that are just pouring money into product, that's building a brand. And the price that it's sold for, the subscription model it uses, the way you're getting distribution, all of those things build the brand. You talked about
Customer support.
software firms. Yep, yep. Like the software firms that get recommended by McKinsey, right? That's your brand, is that McKinsey is referring you. And so you do have to focus on that. You're right. It's not an ad campaign, but that doesn't mean you're not building a brand. And then the flip side is also true, that you see a lot of companies completely stall out when they realize, shit, we've been so hyper focused on product and sales and CAC, right? Customer acquisition cost is the new hot term. CAC, 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 CAC. I want to hear Gilbert Gottfried say, CAC, 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 CAC. It's all I hear about.
It's like a
CAC.
crow,
Although
like a
Gilbert can't do
raven.
it anymore. Um, yeah. So you hear people focused so much on that, and then things kind of stall out, and they're like, what the hell happened? And they realize they have to actually do top of funnel work and get people, when they're not in market to buy, get people to think fondly of them at all, uh, and to remember that they exist. Because a lot of these companies, even 50 million, you know, they, most people still don't know they exist at all.
Hmm.
And so that's where you do need to do brand advertising or some kind of top of funnel work to keep the growth going.
Yep, yep. Okay. And then when we get to the corporate
Yeah.
side as well, so let's go like bigger end of town. So say we're pulling in a couple hundred mil, like 1 bill ARR kind of thing, mode. Like, where does the brand sort of work go more there once you've got all those other sort of bases covered almost?
Well, when you're a big company, you benefit from your bigness, because nothing, what is it? The easiest way to make $1 billion is to be 100 millionaire.
Yeah.
So start with 100 million bucks, and that's how you get $1 billion. Uh, and there is a cumulative advantage to your size in many, many ways. There's a law called the double jeopardy law. I'm not going to get into it now, but really, it should be called the tyranny of market share, because large brands benefit in so many ways from being large. They're on more shelves. They have more facings in the store. They can they can support more advertising in random places. They can sponsor more little league clubs all around the city
More
or the
more
country.
partners want to
They can
associate with them just because they're big, and you've got that sort of added benefit of leverage.
Right. So there are all of these things that are just cumulative advantage of being big, that then allow you to do some things that a small brand can't, because you've got the flywheel going and you hopefully have enough margin to be able to invest in other new things. So one of the big things that an old brand has to do is refresh and reinvigorate and come up with novelty and new things that make sure it doesn't feel stale. And that's on multiple fronts, right? Because you're doing that from a product perspective, you're doing that from a comms perspective, but you have to do it, you have to tweak your packaging a little bit. Who was it? Gordon's Gin. Gordon's Gin did a beautiful packaging reinvigoration refresh recently that just made it feel lively and alive. And they brought in a couple new product SKUs.
The pink
Um,
one,
but
I
also,
see
like
quite a bit.
the
Quite a
pink
good
one.
job on the pink one. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, it's lovely. So Gordon's did a good job of taking their scale and saying, you know what, we can now update and refresh everything and keep it going. But that also matters even for getting talent. If Gordon's Gin wants to get good talent, they need to be seen as a modern, contemporary, cool brand. And so they do the things they need to do to do that as well. So that's where big brands need to
Yeah. So
start,
so 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 in
making sure that
summary,
they're reinvesting.
completely agree. Like in summary, it pays to work for a big brand if you're a marketer because everything's easier. But it's more of a defensive play, I find, than offensive. Like you're maintaining your market share and growth and sort of getting incremental, small percentage points of growth is a large amount of money, but it's a different game, I
Mm-hmm.
find. And I find, that's where refreshes and little tweaks and stuff can be a really valid use of your time. I think where the danger is, and I see this a lot, a smaller brand will buy get some CMO from a big brand, a much larger brand, and go, oh, well, they're awesome over there, and they bring them into a smaller brand, and that person's now more exposed. Then maybe they don't have all those other distribution and product effects and sort of time and size. So then I find that fails really badly because then that person is using a big brand playbook for a smaller brand and focusing on the wrong things. And that's where I find it goes south.
Indeed.
This happens to a lot of startups. They'll, oh, let's do a brand campaign. I'm like, guys, you've only got like 1,000 customers. Like, you should be doing brand ad campaigns. Like, get more customers. Like, that's all you should be doing. Do anything to get more customers. You know, maybe that is a brand campaign, but it's probably highly unlikely that you need to be increasing distribution and maybe supporting that with some like larger sort of drawing your net out a bit bigger. But no, that's a terrible idea. And don't rebrand and refresh. Like, you've only been going for 2 years. Like, why are you refreshing for the fourth
Right.
time? So I think this playbook from big brand gets misinterpreted in a smaller brand context, and that's just why I wanted to see what you thought about that.
100%. For instance, one of the most important things maybe as a small brand is sampling. People have to experience your brand. Yep. First and foremost, Red Bull. Red Bull grew from zero to hero, one of the world's largest brands, very much on the back of sampling the crap out of that product. They had Red Bull Mini Coopers everywhere. They had girls with Red Bull backpacks, Red Bull minivans, Red Bull, three-wheelers, Red Bull motors.
They still do it to this day.
They still do it. Yeah, I was just at a sports event here in Boulder. I live in Boulder, Colorado. And sure enough, there were two women walking around with backpacks, coolers full of Red Bull, handing out Red Bull as if we don't know. But you know what? There are always new people to acquire as customers. So sampling, you're right. Maybe sampling matters so much more than some kind of brand campaign that a big CMO, a big brand CMO would want to introduce.
You're talking about CAC, another big acronym that SaaS like to use, or software, is PLG, which is product-led growth. And I'm like, PLG is just sampling, really. Okay, it's inaccurate. It's just a term they created. But I'm like, really, what you're talking about here as a free tier is product sampling, like for a service. Like, that's what it is.
It's true.
You don't need a new term for it.
They need new words for the same old stuff. Yep. Which is why, again, yeah, it is. It's a rebrand of sampling. But it is why I feel like I've really found success with the laws and levers approach, which is the laws are timeless. The laws are things you can rely on. The laws are things which are pretty darn universal. And so when you get those in your head, it frees you up to then work on the levers and experiment with what might work this year and not next year. Right? Dylan Mulvaney was a lever maybe that didn't really work for Bud Light. So maybe they got to pull some different levers. And they're going to go experiment and try some new stuff. But the laws and levers is a really nice way to bring evidence-based marketing to marketing teams.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, hey, thanks for your time. I think, we covered a good crash course in understanding brand and maybe how to avoid some of these common myths and pitfalls, which is, pretty much why I created this podcast. Like, people just want to know, hey, this is how it works without any commercial lens. I think we did a pretty good job, and I want to thank you for your time, and I hope the champagne's good. So yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way? You're pretty active on LinkedIn, I found.
I am pretty active on LinkedIn. So you can find me there on my personal handle, Ethan Decker, E.H. Decker, or Applied Brand Science, which is my company. I also have a website, appliedbrandscience.com, where I have a blog and a lot more information about the services I offer to either train people in the brand science. I give talks about brand science and brand laws and levers, or to actually do branding and brand building, which I do as well. And then I'm on Twitter. So I tweet, obviously.
I noticed
on
your
Twitter.
One today, actually, XXD. What's that one? It was about, it's like formulas. That was really funny, actually.
There's a cartoonist, Randall Monroe, who goes by his handle XKCD. And he's very much a geeky coding kind of cartoonist. And his cartoons are fantastic because they're just literally stick figures. He does stick figures, but then he does all this really smart, geeky stuff around it. And the cartoon I posted today was basically a whole bunch of different equations, but garbage was one of the features of every equation. So garbage times anything equals garbage. Garbage divided by anything equals garbage. Square root of garbage equals garbage. And it was just this notion that, and again, as a scientist and a data person, no matter what you do to bad data, it's bad data and it won't help. So please know what goes into your models, know what you're measuring, and make sure it's not garbage. It's a great cartoon.
That's a great analogy, perhaps, of like brand myths. Like brand myths times whatever times large budget is still a bad outcome. Not knowing brand science times
Yes.
or divided or square root still equals a bad outcome. So be wary of that. But speaking of that,
Yes.
is there a? And I know I love Tom Fishburne around this. I mention it pretty much every time. But is there like a meme or a comic or a quote about what we're talking about today that either makes you laugh or is this so true that you want to share it with people?
Um,
I know there's a lot.
about marketing and brand science.
Well, brand probably in brand
Uh,
science, yeah, I would say.
and about brand. Yes, Tom Fishburne, who does Brand Camp, aka he's the marketunist. He's got a couple of them I love. One of them is some store clerk saying, "Did you want the one that's providing homes to low income students, or do you want to buy the brand that actually is protecting marmots and marmosets and endangered species, or do you want the brand that's creating photovoltaic electronics?" And they're like, "I want the one that's on sale." And I love just the notion that so many of our consumer decisions are just not that deep because we don't really give a shit and we don't have the time. So that's a great cartoon. And then the other one from a branding person's side is it's a boardroom and there's a bunch of people sitting around the boardroom. And then there's someone sitting on the floor, I think, in the corner. And the people at the boardroom are saying, um, when you have data to back up your assertions, you can come back and sit at the big person's table.
And it's the marketer, right? That's in the corner
It's
on the
probably the
floor.
marketer.
Yeah.
Probably. I
Oh,
love. We're going to create something that they're going to love. We're going to become an iconic brand. Yeah.
no one cares. Okay, and I know you did mention a couple of books, one of which we've both read from EBI. But is there a book that you're reading right now or recently that has changed your mind for the better?
Well, you did mention from the EBI being short for the Ehrenberg Bass Institute
Yes.
and the medium famous How Brands Grow, famous in some circles. How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. Yeah, that's fundamental reading. I also did mention Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. That one was lovely and fabulous. And they make a really nice pair because How Brands Grow is so hard data based and universals and law like nature and academic. And Alchemy is all about the squishy, mushy, illogical side of things. So I think they're a good pairing. There's a book I read recently that I really loved. It's John Cleese's tiny book on creativity.
Ooh.
And I think it's called A Simple Primer or something like that. And it truly is. It's maybe 80 pages long. And John Cleese, of course, is one of the founding members of Monty Python and did Faulty Towers and did A Fish Called Wanda and is just hilarious and funny and an amazing creative person. It's a fabulous book because it really talks about the creative process and how important it is to get into a state of play to allow the subconscious to do its job. Because the unconscious and the subconscious is where so much of our thinking and our ideas come from.
Maybe that's a good way to then approach boards and get them out of that analytical thinking and then maybe tap into that more human element that is a bit harder to measure but quite valuable.
We can talk about that next time. I have a host of
Okay. Okay.
approaches to crack that nut.
Now you have mentioned your favorite website, which is yours. Is there a piece of tech you can't do without that helps do your job better? It could be hardware or software.
A piece of tech I use that helps me do my job really well.
Could be a tool, like a
I,
SaaS
I'm a
tool or some
real
kind of like website hack or OpenAI, brand OpenAI or
Yep,
something.
yep, yep. I've started to use ChatGPT, and that's
Mhm.
fun and interesting. I wouldn't say it's essential to my job, but I'm absolutely trying it out. I love ChatGPT for understanding the norms and the conventions of categories. So, for instance, I was at a conference and they were talking about how the music industry is getting disrupted, and so I wrote into ChatGPT during the conference. I said, write a press release for a new company that's launching a new platform that uses AI to help music creators sell their work. And it did. It was perfect. It was pitch perfect. So ChatGPT really helps you explore the norms of categories, which is lovely. But it's not essential. I think still one of my essential things is texting. I like to text people and I like to hear back from text. And then even better than that is the phone. I like to have a conversation
Same.
because it's just so much lost when you're trying to get it just through words.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, great. Now you've already mentioned the best way to contact you. So yeah, and you've already sort of plugged, what you do. But if your potential customers are listening right now, who would they be, and what's your pitch?
If you are working on a brand and feel like it's stuck or you haven't unlocked its potential, and maybe you've heard about this evidence based stuff or heard about how brands grow and Byron Sharp, or if you feel like you can't sell in the value of brand to your organization because they're focused on CAC and performance marketing and ROAS and these kinds of metrics, and you want to kind of unlock that, I can come in and work with you and your team to understand the laws and the levers of brand science so that you can unlock the potential in your brand and grow your brand and grow your business.
Great. Okay, short and sweet. Well, thanks again for having a chat, Ethan. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your champagne and say hello to the pooch for me. And until next time, let's chat again.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It was a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
Cheers. I'm going to stop that there.